Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. May God bless the ring of his word. Bible Smack. So today I'm just going to kind of give you all a little notice of what's going on in my literary world. And that is the fact that I am writing a new book called The Fact of Creation. Now, I found it better, being my state of poverty, that if I self-publish a book, it's usually like barely breaking even and not reaching a lot of people because I self-published. For a couple $1,000s, I might be able to do something more. I just don't have $1,000 or a couple $1,000s. So I've decided to just focus on my blog, and I'm knitting these blogs together. So I'm making several chapters, and I've described a few of the chapters already. The contention in my book, The Fact of Creation, is that a creator God is a fact. That there is a creator God. And basically, I go about this a little bit differently than most. Most people are either just arguing philosophy, whether God sounds rational. Many people are arguing science. Is there evidence for God? What I am doing is I am making a cumulative case, which is using several different forms. But I start my case off with this: the historical argument for God. I've mentioned it before. Briefly, I'll state that you look throughout all cultures and you find different tales of a God who created heaven and earth, or all things. And I found, at least through Wikipedia, I found 36 creator gods. And they were from tribes all over the earth in every continent. And sometimes they would have floods, Towers of Babel, Gardens of Eden, and most often they would be masculine. From that pile of tradition, I look for the most accurate one, which I find in the Bible, because of the Noah's Ark and how accurate Noah's Ark is detailed by comparison. And also some other historical records that would connect it, such as the Tower of Babel, the Table of Nations, etc. So once we get that agreement, then we start looking at the history. And typically, Genesis has been snipped to little pieces by theologians. So I'm looking for historical evidence of God. Thus, I look to not theologians, I look to historians. And I go through historians like Josephus, like Philo, Eusebius, and several others, Herodotus, a little bit. And basically, from there, I get this accurate reading of God, creation, Genesis as historical. I also look at other sources than the Bible. What I would count as the Apocrypha, the Pseudepigrapha. Maybe I'd have to go back and look. We might have some New Testament Apocrypha. But also the Quran. So through all these different ancient sources, you have this continued massive tradition of the God of the Bible creating the world in similar fashion. So at that point, we have a historical record that there is a God. History is about people in the past observing something. It should be the number one observation of the past. Other observations like archaeology are more speculative because they start here and try to work their way backwards. You can't do an experiment now and get the results of 1,000 or several thousand years ago. So then, the question is, well, is this rational? So then I went through the ontological argument. I've got a video that I did on it all the way through. It was over a half hour. But to put it simply, if we look at the question, does God exist? Either, no, he does not exist because he is a myth. Somebody made him up. B, no. God is an impossible concept. We cannot comprehend God. C, yes, God exists. Then using the definition of God, some of his basic functions that people agree on is being almighty, his omnipotence, his omniscience, his omnipresence, his eternality. We realize that it is the opposite of a myth, because a myth is not all-powerful, a myth is not eternal, a myth is not omnipresent, and a myth is not omniscient. So all these omnis that describe God do not describe a myth. Therefore, God is not a myth. People understand the definition of God. They have accredited degree programs in theology, and they've had this for thousands of years all over the world. People are tested on their knowledge, so they should know who and what God is. Therefore, he's not an impossible concept. Therefore, there is a God. Now, you can watch my half-hour program where I just loop the logic out over and over and over again. And then I tag creation with it. Now, so you have an observation of God, and you have a rational justification of God. Then I deal with the issue of geocentricity. I make a case for geocentricity in the Earth's unique position in the universe. If I only prove that the Earth has a unique position in the universe, I win. Because what made the Earth unique? There's nobody to make the Earth unique. So what made the Earth unique? Well, it would have had to been a designer, a God. That's what we call the anthropic principle. So, after I've settled that case that we have a universe with a designer, and then we had that is rational and historical, then we look at evolution and talk about how evolution is extinct. Why? Well, because the key parts of evolution do not have evidence. We have to have a start of life somewhere. Life begins and ends. It has to have an ultimate starting point. And yet abiogenesis has been blown out of the water for well over a century. And it was discovered to be that way. Even in the 1800s there's evidence of that. Yet we move on. And on and on and on and on. So then we look at some of these other basic components. You have to, we have the fossil record. Fossils do not have proof of their ancestry or proof that they've reproduced. We can only tell what a fossil is like. But the fossil's death always comes in chaos, because fossils by nature would have been absorbed into the environment through scavenger animals. Well, then you have the evolutionary family tree. The family tree is a complete picture. It's just drawn. It's made up. It's completely artificial. So since it's artificial, And since our system of understanding evolution is paleontology based on geology, based on paleontology based on geology, based on paleontology based on geology, what we have is circular reasoning. But they say, hey, but we've got this geologic scale in your book, not in real life. There's only 2 places that have all the columns. One place in the Dakotas in America, another place in China. But it should be in most every dig site, or at least maybe half. But no. You have one example. These examples were not as deep as Charles Lyell figured. He thought that they would be 100 miles deep. They were not. Only 1 mile deep. So they're only 1 mile deep, and they don't carry as much time. And they need the time. They need billions of years of time. Therefore, the circular logic debunks the whole thing. And, oh yeah, there's also, you can only get 15 to 20%, or no, 15 to 20 places where they find 3 of the columns in order out of 15. And so, we don't have the evidence to overturn the history. Because you got to completely destroy the other model with truth. You have to have authority. Evolution is not based on authority. And there's other issues, irreducible complexity, etc. Well, then we move on to the case I'm making right now. It's called Jesus, the God of Creation. Now, this one is different because it is not really arguing that based on Jesus, God is a fact, because you do have to be persuaded, whereas a fact is just a fact. To be shown, you have to be persuaded. The odds are incredibly high that Jesus is God. And I do that through several different means. But the issue at hand is not about whether the religion is true. But the issue at hand is that the case against a creator God is 99% of the time completely metaphysical. It is, well, why is there evil? Why did God create evil? Why can you call anything evil? That's a stalemate. If you can't come up with objective morality, then you can't say this is objectively wrong. So, the attack is based on this idea that, we've metaphysically shown we have a world with evil, therefore God does not exist. But you say, well, God allows for free will. However, they say, why is there free will? Now, when we have Jesus as God, we have Jesus as a man who is also God. Jesus as a man has to have free will because he's also God, and God has free will. Therefore, if Jesus has free will, then man has free will. If man has free will, then we do have responsibility. Also, I demonstrate where some of the most famous people in world history have ascended to the fact that Jesus was a moral and ethical person. Since Jesus is a moral and ethical person, if he is God, then God is moral and ethical and good. Bang, right there. We win. Also, Jesus in judgment brings restoration and life to the world, offers all men salvation, even those damned to hell. But how do you know that Jesus is God? Well, in that verse I showed that the Messiah is God. Isaiah 9:6. Don't worry, I have plenty of scripture besides that. But I'm just doing this for time's sake. In Isaiah, I find 7 places that have prophecy about the Messiah. And if these places are right, well, then the chances are, mathematically, that Jesus is the Messiah. They've used illustrations in the past about quarters 3 feet high throughout the entire state of Texas, and finding the one with 1 mark would be the same chances as Jesus fulfilling all these prophecies. Jesus fulfilled about 300 to 400 prophecies. But these are important. The reason is because the Dead Sea Scrolls have a copy of Isaiah that is 100%, if not nearly 100%. And these copies are from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they've been carbon dated between 50 and 130 years prior to the time of Christ. This means that this is a fact. That there's no Bible tampering, JDP, all that kind of stuff. No. There is something prophesied, and there is something fulfilled. Also, we deal with some other evidences like the resurrection. We know that Jesus rose from the dead because we know he died, and we know that his body is missing. We also know that he was physically incapable of leaving the empty tomb on his own. He had nails in his feet and in his hands. He also had a stone that was probably around 3,000 to 4,000 pounds. In the story of the raising of Lazarus, there is a normal stone, which is usually about 1,000 pounds. And he has friends roll it away. Question: how could Jesus have rolled something 4 times that much away if he couldn't get the other one when he's at full health? It seems obvious that Jesus would have needed help, and if he was dead, there's no way that he could have escaped. So why is there an empty tomb? People would say, well, the apostles took the body. But in the book of Acts, the apostles were apprehended by the Jerusalem Council, or the Sanhedrin. So they were apprehended. They could have took care of everything right there, unless there was evidence to the contrary. So they knew that there was an empty tomb. And then you could say, well, there was a hallucination. However, hallucinations, number one, typically they don't catch on. You might have, if I say a hot air balloon, you might see a hot air balloon, but it might not look like the hot air balloon that I'm thinking of. Okay, it's hard to catch a hallucination. And so then we have other things Jesus' morality attested to, and the old problem of the Lord, liar, lunatic. Jesus, if he was not Lord, he was a liar, or he was a lunatic. But he does not appear to be either. And so we prove Jesus, then we have proved God along with him. Because he's risen from the dead and fulfilled Bible prophecy. And he is good. Thus, we have a moral authority, while the secular world, most of the Eastern world, does not even have a moral authority. Then, how can you judge me? And so, basically, that's kind of the linchpin right there. Is that we have, and we need to argue for a God who is incarnate in Christ. We can add the other aspects, but this really does bring back the philosophical force of the argument. I'll catch you later.